We just talked about recruiting. Now we're going to talk about performance reviews. And here with us will be Bruce, the director for the Masters of Human Resources Executive Program at Utah State University. Since you're here with me, I definitely would love to learn more about your work and what led you to academia.
Yeah, so I actually spent 30 years as a human resources professional, and the last 14 as a chief human resources officer for a company called Extra Space Storage, which is now one of the largest real estate REITs in the country. And I was asked by my church, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to go preside over one of their missions, which, as you probably have seen, young men in white shirts and ties with little name tags on, and ladies similarly dressed with skirts and so forth. So I was asked to go preside over that mission in Puerto Rico for 3 years. And so my wife and I went to kind of understand it's sort of a sabbatical, if you will. And just as we were finishing that up, I had adjunct professor before at Utah State, and just as we were finishing that up, I received an invitation from the university to join the Huntsman School of Business and to be the director of that program. So it was nice. It was a great thing for me and a great opportunity. And I will just say that for many of you who are listening, Utah State is one of the great secrets, if you will, in the world of human resources. It's been a leader in human resource management and leadership for about 3 decades, unknown to most. It's probably one of the top 5 programs, the day program, those who are traditional MHR students. The day program is probably one of the top 5 programs in the country. And our online program, the professional program that I lead, is right now the #1 program in the country, which would shock you. For most people, they would look at Cornell or other universities, which do a really wonderful job. But we have the privilege of being #1 this year. Now, that may change next year, but we're #1 this year. So we're excited about that.
That's fantastic. And best of all, I get to speak with you about your work, given that you are, have done everything from working in a very business space to HR to now teaching about it.
Yeah.
Conventionally, wisdom holds that happy employees are engaged employees, and engaged employees play a significant role in companies' financial performance. But COVID-19 has disrupted the way we work and interact with customers. So, what is happening to employees' experience right now?
Yeah, I think employees' experiences are really being driven largely by how well the company does. I think a couple things. Number one is the company itself has to get COVID right. They have to be doing the things that are foundational in taking care of their employees and making sure that they are safe. And employees want to know that, they want to hear it, and they want to make sure that the company is doing what they perceive to be all the company can do to make sure that they're safe. I think the second thing is, and I think your guest speaker before me mentioned this, in this particular circumstance, where leadership fails is if it fails to communicate. This is really the time where leaders need to communicate with their employees and be really granular in some of their communication. We know you're working from home. We know you have two children. We know you're doing your best. That's all we can ask from you. And here's the deliverable I need next, kind of thing. In this regard, I believe that communication is really currency, and human resources and leadership people can actually create a lot of currency in their communication. You know, we always think of something like a Department of Human Resources. It's a cost center. You know, we have to evaluate that cost all the time. Are we getting a bang for our buck? Really, how HR can add value is through this communication, keeping employees close to them, listening to them, talking with them, and communicating what's important, especially now as we have a dispersed workforce, is really critical. And I think the companies that do it well are the companies that are going to actually survive this and do fairly well. And the ones that don't are really going to struggle, especially with their talent.
It leads us to performance evaluations that are happening more often now than in the past. And how productive is it to evaluate an employee based on their individual performance and how their team performs as a whole? How can HR fairly evaluate an employee because we can't use the same metrics across every department and every workforce?
Yeah, let's just talk about that for a second. I mean, I think one of the challenges that we will face in the human resource sphere when organizations come to us and say, help us evaluate talent. A lot of times what they're really saying is, look, we have a budget, we have a dollar amount, and we want to share that. And so help us share that in the most appropriate way possible that's fair and equitable across the board. And many companies take off in that direction. I would say that's not really talent evaluation. That's financial dispersion. It's really sort of figuring out, okay, well, we've got this money and we know we want to share it. We want to keep our employees happy. And so we then mythically make up some sense of a process that suggests a way to actually disperse that money. And we call it evaluation, right? Now, there are other companies that do, I think, a credible effort to say, look, this is what's important to us as a company. These are our company goals. And this is what we promised our shareholders or our investors that we were going to deliver financially. So we want our employees to understand that and make sure that their efforts tie to that. And we will evaluate them based on that. Unfortunately, a lot of times what happens in those kinds of circumstances, when the large mothership, if you will, decides what we're all going to do, is there's a large portion of the workforce that can't get there. They emotionally, it's too big for them in terms of what I do and what the company is saying. I don't see it meshing together. And so we have a large portion of the population of our employees who can't get there. And so what we essentially do then is we identify people that we call high performers, or in HR speak, we call them hypos. And of course, because we have hypos, we have to have lowpos, which are the low performers, right? And those represent maybe 15% of the upper echelon and then 15% of the lower population. And then we have all these people in between. And unfortunately, for those people who are in between, they don't get the same amount of attention as the hypos and the lowpos. And I sort of refer to this system with my students tongue in cheek as it's sort of dumbo. I mean, it's not, when we think about it rationally, we just left out something like 70% of our workforce. And we're investing the limited resources we have in the top 15% or eliminating the bottom 15% in some form or fashion. And that's called evaluation, right? And I don't see the benefit of that exercise besides dispersing money and doing something for a small group of people. So really, the idea, I think, going forward in this very challenging time is to recognize, how do we engage all of our employees? And if you think about it, if you could take that 70% of your employee base and get them to move from, say, in a crude description, a C player who meets expectations, if you could move some of those, a good portion of those, from C players to B players, how much more successful would your company be? It's your largest group of employees. And so our desire is to see evaluation get pushed not from the top down, where the top insists that this is what we have to do, but from the top, where we create a vision and a sense of, this is what we want to achieve. Now you, in your individual work groups, decide what you want to do to help us get there, and allow teams to actually work with individual people to set their goals and help them understand how they add value and what they deliver. Now I think we've got an evaluation system that's got some legs, because what we're evaluating people on is what they believe they can contribute and how they would measure themselves. And I think that's those are some things that I think are really important. One, we all do this. We have a 9-block system, right? And we put potential and performance on the grids, the X and Y axes, and then we create this great 9-block. I'm just not sure that any of us are really good at identifying what Rachel's potential is. I can see how many widgets Rachel produces, or how many customer satisfaction surveys Rachel gets back, or how quickly she responds to certain things. I get that I can evaluate her output, and I get that I can see some characteristics and some traits, but I'm just not sure I'm very good, or anyone, quite frankly, is very good at potential. And so people like Marcus Buckingham have started talking more and more about forget potential and start talking about momentum. What kind of momentum does Rachel have? How is she viewed by other people? What kind of energy and enthusiasm is she bringing to grow her career and to really make a difference in our organization? That kind of evaluation has to be done at a team level, and it has to be tied to the organizational goals, or it just doesn't roll up very well, and it just doesn't help the individual, again, see sort of the end from the beginning. How do I add value to the organization, and how does that motivate me? I can't hear you.
That makes complete sense, because even in the classroom, students are being evaluated by their individual performance and then how well they perform as a group and how their teammates are rating them as well. And so it only makes sense that this is the real world, and the way that I guess when you think about objectives, when you think about goals and performance, sometimes it's better to reflect on what that person has set out and intended to achieve, rather than just saying, hey, this is what you will be aiming towards this year.
Yeah, and here's where I think we're going. I think really what we're really looking towards is trying to help people discover who they are and who they want to be in the context of work. And when I started my career, no one would have cared about that, right? It was like, if you want to work for this company, you need to do X, Y, and Z to be successful. This is how you adjust yourself to fit in. Very fair observation at that time. But I think where we've gotten to now is we want people to do their best work wherever they are and wherever they're located. And we want to evaluate them based on their work and their, the directional intent that they're going in, their momentum. And I think if we can sort of shift that in our mindset, then we begin to say, okay, well, how as an organization can we do that? Well, first of all, we've got to change how we evaluate talent. We've got to change the 9-block, right? And we have to have team leaders who really know their people better and who really care. Someone said to me the other day, I just wish people wouldn't bring their stuff, their problems to work. And I just think that time has long passed, where we expected people to check everything at the door and be Google or Adobe or IBM or a big 3 accounting firm. That's great to think about it, but honestly, in practicality, there's no way. People are going to bring things to work, and they need empathy. In recent studies that we've been looking at, two characteristics of a leader right now are becoming critical during this pandemic. Number 1 is trust, and number 2 is empathy. And if we don't have either one of those, as we try to help people build themselves and therefore evaluate them, if we don't let them talk about those things, their stuff at work, then it's going to be difficult for us to demonstrate empathy. And it's also going to be difficult for them to have trust in us.
And to capture and improve the full employee's experience, which goes beyond just employee satisfaction and even employee engagement. Bruce, what data in the employee's life cycle can help HR assess where they are and then evaluate them? Again, going back to fairly.
Yeah, I think there's a couple pulse points that we really need to understand. One is more frequent contact with employees on how they're doing and what they're delivering. I think is really super important. In other words, we're not really asking people what you do, we're asking you what you deliver. We're not asking them how they spend their day, we're asking them what they've gotten accomplished. What's your momentum? What's your velocity, right? How are you doing? And I think that's one. I think another one is, I think it's great to ask about satisfaction. We used to just ask satisfaction, and then we decided that engagement was important, so we bolted on 12 or 15 questions to the satisfaction survey and split those out. And now many companies are asking, doing those surveying separately, which I think is probably helping them. But I honestly, satisfaction is, there's a lot of people satisfied because they're receiving a paycheck and they still have a job, and that's good. But what we want is to try to get people to feel a sense of ownership. And so I think we're really, at this point, we're trying to figure out where people are in terms of engagement, and how are they staying engaged? Are they feeling engaged? So.
And Bruce, when we talk about satisfaction and employees' experience and engagement, it kind of goes back to the customer experience, because the more engaged employees are, the better they perform, and hopefully that will make an impact on your business bottom line, and that go back to the satisfaction that your customers may feel. And so, how relevant is customer experience as a metric to employees' experience and workforce evaluation?
Well, I think it's very, very important, and I think it's very relevant. We know statistically that companies that have made that connection between customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction and engagement, those companies actually perform on the New York Stock Exchange head and shoulders above other companies, and so we know it's important. And we know that there's some linkage there. But again, sometimes because organizations are often so verticalized, and we do this and we do that, and another group of the organization does this, that we don't often see the final end product, which is why the team, the smaller work organization, becomes so important. How does what we do in this team impact our customer? What is our customer thinking? Who is our customer? We have internal customers, external customers. Who are they really? And that kind of thing can be defined as, I think, so much stronger at the team level than at the global organization level. We often talk about specific companies having great culture, and that resonates with me. I get that. What I have seen in my career and in my consulting is culture is what happens at the lower levels of your organization. The very granular levels of your organization is where culture is really defined. I mean, you could talk about it all you want, but when you really implement it, what your culture is what's being implemented at that low level. If our employees get it from their teams, it's more likely to cascade up and actually match the overall message of an organization. And all of that gets driven by, again, what is your focus? Your customer facing, and who are your customers, and understanding that really well.
Bruce, you just made a really good point about culture. And now that we're facing a different working style, where there may be employees physically on site, and then there are employees who are working in distributed teams, what are some challenges we're facing as we're building and fostering a whole new culture that should accommodate and establish a strong foundation for an organization
Yeah,
that offers both?
I think that's a great question. I think some of the challenges are these. We used to have 300 people working at the headquarters in San Antonio, Texas. We could walk around and talk to all of them at some point. We could hold all hands on deck meetings and meet with all of the supervisors all at the same time, which made evaluation and cooperation and communication fairly simple. I don't think we were good at it, but it was simpler, right? And now, how do you evaluate a team that's completely dispersed and every one of them's working from home? How do you evaluate somebody who's a new employee who's actually never worked in your facility? You've onboarded somebody remotely and they're a part of the team, so how do you evaluate them? Well, one of the only ways you can evaluate them is what they're delivering. And in previous times, we might have let the fact that Bruce always came into work 5 minutes or 15 minutes late and always left 10 minutes early, and that somehow devalues what he's doing. When I compare him to Rachel, that's got to impact his potential, right? Because that's not executive behavior. Well, now what we care about is what people deliver. And so we're not so worried about when they start or when they finish. We worry about what they do, and we worry about how they're doing it. And so, yeah, these are challenging times that way. But again, if we go back to communication as currency, I think if I were a supervisor, I would risk over communicating to make sure that there aren't any gaps in between myself and my team in terms of what we have to deliver, what our timelines are, what's the deadline, what is the customer product. I live close to the Silicon Slope here in Salt Lake City, and it's sort of been IT that's moved from different places in the country to Utah. We call it the Silicon Slope because it's IT facing, but they live close to ski resorts and other things. We have some of the greatest snow in the world right here. And one of the things that they're talking about is how they can best continue to communicate. And one of the phenomenons they see is speed to market has actually, with some of their product deliveries, has actually increased. And there's all kinds of pontification as to why that is. But frankly, they feel like part of the reason is they're focusing on what's being delivered and not a bunch of other tangential things. And so I think that's an exciting piece of this difficult dilemma, right?
And we have a question from our audience, which reminds me I want to thank everyone that sent in the questions for our speakers. You take the time to be here and speak to our audience, and I appreciate how engaged they are. So please send in questions and please engage with our polling questions as well as it help us understand your pain points. But a question here is, Bruce, can you comment on how continuous feedback, peer and manager reviews is replacing less frequency performance reviews, and if you are seeing emergent best practices around how this information is used?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think one of the things that the question suggests is that more feedback on a regular basis is probably better, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that if it's quality feedback. There's this great line in a movie where this woman is taking pictures of a property that the protagonist he wants to sell, and he's asking her to take pictures. And he says, well, why aren't you taking more pictures? And she says to him, because more isn't necessarily better. More is just more. I love that. I love that comment, and I've used it in a lot of different settings in my life because I think it's really true. So, is continual feedback important? Yes. Is continual peer and leadership feedback important in terms of how people are doing their work? Yes, if it's the right kind of feedback. If it's the kind of feedback that is more driven by how are you doing, tell me what you're encountering, how can I help you be better, that's great. If it's, well, you didn't do this and I need you to do this, and it's more telling, then that's not necessarily any more beneficial, right? What we want is to help people in their trajectory and in their momentum. How can I help you? Here's a reality that we all sort of have to get our arms around, particularly people in my generation. People don't work for managers anymore. Managers work for people. And it's a huge shift from when I started. And what that means is that's their expectation. You work for them as a leader. You clear the way for them. So when you're saying to them, I need you to do this, 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 and this, and not asking them how you can help them deliver that, then you're really not motivating them or helping them in a way that will help them achieve better results.
Really appreciate your time today, Bruce.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.